You step into a corridor you have never been in before. The light is too specific to be imagined. The sound of your own footsteps feels wrong in a way you cannot name. You know this place. Not vaguely, not as a guess, with absolute, total certainty, you have stood here before. You can feel the shape of the next moment before it arrives. But you haven't been here. You know that too, with equal certainty. Both things are true at once, and your mind cannot reconcile them. This is not a spiritual experience. It is not a past life memory, not a premonition, not a glitch in a simulation. What is happening inside your skull is a precise, measurable neurological event. Your brain has just routed your present moment sensory experience directly into its long-term memory archive, before delivering it to your conscious awareness. You are not remembering the past. You are experiencing the present on a delay, arriving fractionally late to your own life. The phrase déjà vu was coined in 1876 by a French philosopher named Émile Boirac. Boirac was writing about parapsychology and needed a name for the sensation of false familiarity. He translated it simply, already seen. For the next century, science largely set it aside. Déjà vu lasted only seconds, left no measurable trace, and could not be reproduced in a laboratory. It was interesting to philosophers but useless to scientists, until the early 2000s, when neurologists studying temporal lobe epilepsy noticed something they could not ignore. Patients were consistently reporting déjà vu as an aura, a neurological warning signal occurring in the seconds immediately before a seizure. This meant déjà vu was not random. It was being generated by a specific region of the brain under measurable physiological conditions. The search for that region led back to an operating table in Montreal in 1955. Wilder Penfield was one of the most influential neurosurgeons of the 20th century. At the Montreal Neurological Institute, he operated on epilepsy patients while they remained fully conscious, removing damaged brain tissue to reduce their seizures. Before cutting, he mapped the brain by touching different regions with a small electrical electrode and asking patients what they experienced. Most responses were predictable. Touch the motor cortex, and a hand twitches. Touch the visual cortex, and the patient sees a flash of light. But when Penfield stimulated certain regions of the temporal lobe, something unexpected happened. Patients did not report sensations. They reported memories. One patient heard a familiar piece of music that was not playing in the room. Another described a childhood scene in vivid, specific detail. Several reported an overwhelming, total certainty that they had experienced the present moment before. Déjà vu, produced on demand by an electrode. Penfield published his findings in 1955 and called it experiential hallucination. He had located the territory, the temporal lobe, but he had not yet explained the mechanism. To understand that mechanism, you need to understand that memory is not one system. It is at least two, running in parallel, built for different purposes. The first system handles familiarity. It answers a single, fast question. Have I encountered this before? This system lives primarily in the perirhinal cortex, a strip of tissue folded into the inner wall of the temporal lobe. The perirhinal cortex operates below conscious awareness. It scans incoming sensory data and returns a verdict, familiar or not, in milliseconds. You do not decide to feel recognition. The perirhinal cortex fires, and you simply know. The second system handles recollection. It answers the deeper question, when and where did I encounter this before? This system depends on the hippocampus, the curved structure seated deeper in the temporal lobe. The hippocampus retrieves context, the time, the place, the specific circumstances that anchor a memory to a moment. Normally, these two systems fire in sequence. Familiarity arrives first, a surge of recognition, and then recollection confirms it with specific context. You recognize a face and recall where you met the person. The two signals arrive so close together that you experience them as a single, seamless act of memory. Déjà vu is what happens when that sequence breaks. The rhinal cortex, which includes the perirhinal and entorhinal cortex, sits at the entry point of the memory system. Every piece of sensory data entering memory passes through it first. In a normal moment, the processing chain works like this. Sensory signals arrive from your eyes, your ears, your body. The rhinal cortex processes them and passes them forward into the parahippocampal gyrus, a ridge of tissue that provides spatial and contextual framing for the incoming data. From there, the signal moves into the hippocampus, which encodes it as a specific episodic memory. Finally, the processed signal reaches the prefrontal cortex, the seat of conscious awareness, and becomes an experience you know is happening. This chain takes time. Not much, under a second total. But each step takes a measurable number of milliseconds, and each step occurs in a specific order. Déjà vu is what happens when that order is violated. In a déjà vu episode, incoming sensory data travels two routes simultaneously. The fast route moves directly toward conscious awareness. The slow route travels through the rhinal cortex and into the memory indexing network. In ordinary experience, the fast route reaches consciousness first, and memory processes the moment afterward. But in a déjà vu episode, the slow route fires first, or fires simultaneously with the fast route instead of after it. The parahippocampal gyrus receives the incoming signal and stamps it, filed, archived, already encountered. Then, milliseconds later, the same signal arrives at conscious awareness. But consciousness is now receiving data that has already been marked as a memory. It arrives pre-labeled as past. And so consciousness experiences a present moment as something that has already occurred. You are not remembering the past. You are receiving the present, after the memory archive has already claimed it as history. The clearest evidence for this mechanism came from people who could not stop experiencing it. Dr. Chris Moulin is a cognitive neuropsychologist at Université Grenoble-Alpes in France, who has spent 2 decades studying what he calls pathological déjà vu. In 2006, Moulin documented a case unlike any the field had recorded. His patient was an elderly man from Leeds who had stopped watching television entirely. Not because he couldn't follow the content, but because he was certain he had already seen everything. Every program, every news broadcast, every film registered as completely, absolutely familiar. He stopped reading the newspaper because he believed he had already read it. He stopped going to medical appointments because he was convinced he had already attended them. His family described him as trapped in a loop, present in body but unreachable, certain he was reliving a life already lived. Brain scans revealed significant degeneration in his temporal lobe, specifically in the structures responsible for generating and regulating familiarity signals. The damage had not erased his memories. It had destroyed the mechanism that evaluates whether a familiarity signal is legitimate. His brain was flagging every incoming experience as already encountered, with nothing left able to override it. Moulin documented several more cases in the years that followed. Patients with different causes of temporal lobe damage, all converging on the same symptom, a familiarity signal that never switched off. The condition revealed something fundamental. Déjà vu is not a memory appearing from nowhere. It is the familiarity signal firing without authorization from any actual memory. In 2003, psychologist Alan Brown at Southern Methodist University in Dallas published the most comprehensive survey of déjà vu research ever assembled. He reviewed over 80 years of studies, some dating back to surveys conducted in Europe in the 1890s. Approximately 60 to 70% of people report experiencing déjà vu at some point in their lives. It is most common between the ages of 15 and 25. Frequency declines with age, not because older people are fundamentally different, but because their memory systems have grown more stable and less prone to timing errors. Fatigue amplifies it, stress amplifies it, and novelty amplifies it most of all. People who travel frequently report significantly more déjà vu than people who rarely leave familiar environments. Brown's interpretation: the rhinal cortex is most likely to misfire when it is processing large volumes of new sensory data that partially resembles stored data. A new corridor with the same proportions as one from your past gives the perirhinal cortex just enough partial overlap to fire a false familiarity signal. Novelty, paradoxically, is the trigger. For most of its history, déjà vu was impossible to study in real time. By the time a researcher could reach a subject experiencing it, the episode was already over. In 2012, cognitive psychologist Cleary at Colorado State University found a way to produce it in the laboratory. Cleary built pairs of virtual reality environments that shared hidden structural similarities, a hotel lobby and a garden courtyard with the same spatial layout, even though they looked completely different. Subjects first explored one environment, then were placed in the other. Most couldn't consciously remember the first environment, but many reported an inexplicable sense of familiarity in the second, a certainty without source. Some reported a feeling that they could predict what would appear around the next corner. They were correct, because the perirhinal cortex had retained the spatial geometry from the first environment and was firing a recognition signal that the hippocampus could not confirm with any specific memory. Familiarity without recollection, recognition without source. Clearly reproduced and refined the effect across multiple studies through 2018, each time isolating more precisely which features of an environment triggered the misfire. The most direct neurological view inside a déjà vu episode came in 2016. Dr. Akira O'Connor and his team at the University of St. Andrews used functional MRI to scan subjects while they were actively experiencing déjà vu. To trigger it, they used a word priming technique. Subjects heard a list of related words, then were asked a question designed to produce familiarity without retrieval. When déjà vu occurred, O'Connor expected to see activation primarily in the memory structures, the hippocampus, the parahippocampal gyrus. What he found was unexpected. The strongest activation was in the frontal lobes, specifically in regions associated with conflict monitoring, error detection, and decision-making. The memory regions were quiet. The error detection system was active. O'Connor's conclusion reframed the entire phenomenon. Déjà vu is not the brain failing. It is the brain's quality control system catching a failure. The frontal lobes are detecting a contradiction, a remembered signal arriving for something that hasn't been experienced yet, and broadcasting an internal alert. The discomfort you feel during déjà vu, the uncanny doubling, the certainty mixed with confusion, is the sensation of your error detection system running in real time. You feel it because your brain is catching itself in a mistake and alerting you. The weirdness is not the failure. The weirdness is the alarm. Put all of this together and a specific picture emerges. At the moment of déjà vu, your brain's two parallel processing streams have fallen fractionally out of sync. The memory indexing channel, running through the déjà cortex and the parahippocampal system, received the incoming data and stamped it as past. The conscious awareness channel received the same data a fraction of a second later and found it pre-labeled. You arrived at your own present moment after it had already been filed as history. But here's what none of this fully prepares you for. This delay is not unique to déjà vu. It is the permanent condition of conscious experience. Every moment of your life reaches consciousness after a delay. Light entering your eyes takes time to be processed. Sound arriving at your ears takes slightly longer. Touch takes longer still. Your brain collects all of these signals, each arriving at a different time, and stitches them into a unified now, a now that is, technically, always the past. Déjà vu is not an aberration. It is a moment when the machinery becomes briefly visible. The seam shows. The curtain slips. For 2 or 3 seconds, you experience consciousness not as a window onto reality, but as a recording of it. And the reason it feels so wrong, so uncanny, so impossible to dismiss, is that it is not wrong. Your brain, in those seconds, is telling you the truth. You are always slightly behind your own experience. You have never once lived in the present tense. You live in a version of the past so recent, so seamlessly rendered, that you have never noticed the gap. Until the timing slips. Until the archive stamps the moment before consciousness can claim it. And for those few uncanny seconds, you feel what you always are. Not a witness to the world, but a delayed reconstruction of it. The corridor was never familiar. Your brain just processed it before you arrived.